Amanda Foster's father was a general, her brother was a Navy SEAL, and she was supposed to be the family's crowning achievement as the first female pilot in their military dynasty. Instead, she became the family disgrace who crashed a $30 million fighter jet and ended her career in shame. But the real story would make her the greatest hero her family had ever produced. The Foster family had served America with distinction for 4 generations. General Robert Foster commanded the 82nd Airborne Division and had earned 3 Bronze Stars during his deployment in Iraq. Commander Jake Foster was a decorated Navy SEAL who had completed over 40 classified missions in Afghanistan and Syria. The family's military legacy was legendary within Pentagon circles, representing the kind of dedication and excellence that defined American military leadership. Amanda Foster was supposed to continue this tradition of exceptional service. At 28, she was one of the youngest pilots ever selected for the elite Thunderbirds demonstration team, following a career that had included multiple combat deployments and commendations for exceptional flying skills. Her selection for the Thunderbirds represented the pinnacle of Air Force pilot achievement and would have made her the first woman in her family to reach such prestigious heights in military service. The Foster family had high expectations for Amanda's Thunderbirds career. Her success would not only represent personal achievement, but would also demonstrate that the family's military excellence extended across gender lines. Amanda felt the weight of these expectations, knowing that her performance would influence how other military families viewed women in combat roles. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? Amanda's preparation for her first major Thunderbirds demonstration was meticulous and intensive. She had spent months perfecting the precision flying techniques required for formation demonstrations, working with squadron leaders to develop routines that would showcase American air power while inspiring public support for military service. The demonstration, scheduled for Memorial Day weekend at Andrews Air Force Base, was expected to draw over 50,000 spectators. What happened on May 27, 2023, changed everything the Foster family thought they knew about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Amanda was conducting a routine training flight in preparation for the weekend demonstration when air traffic control received an emergency communication that would test every aspect of her training and character. Flight 47, a commercial airliner carrying 806 passengers from Boston to Washington, D.C., had been hijacked by terrorists who intended to crash the aircraft into the Capitol building during a joint session of Congress. The hijackers had disabled the plane's communication systems and were flying at low altitude to avoid radar detection, making interception by ground-based defense systems impossible. Amanda's F-16 was the closest military aircraft to the hijacked airliner's projected flight path. Air traffic control vectored her toward the commercial flight, with instructions to establish visual contact and assess the situation. What Amanda saw when she intercepted Flight 47 confirmed intelligence reports about the hijacking and revealed the true scope of the terrorist threat. The commercial aircraft was flying erratically at dangerously low altitude, clearly under the control of someone unfamiliar with proper flight procedures. Amanda could see through the cockpit windows that the original flight crew had been subdued, and unknown individuals were operating the aircraft's controls. The plane was heading directly toward Washington, D.C. airspace at a speed and altitude that indicated intention to crash into a ground target. Amanda's radio communications with ground control revealed the impossible situation she faced. The hijacked aircraft was less than 15 minutes from reaching the Capitol building, where over 500 members of Congress were assembled for a special Memorial Day session. Ground-based defense systems could not engage the target without risking catastrophic debris falling into populated areas of Washington, D.C. Military protocols for dealing with hijacked aircraft heading toward critical targets were clear but devastating in their implications. Amanda was authorized to shoot down the commercial airliner to prevent it from reaching its intended target. However, destroying a passenger aircraft would result in the deaths of 18 innocent civilians, creating a moral crisis that no pilot should face. Amanda's training had prepared her for combat situations where enemy targets were clearly defined and civilian casualties could be minimized. The scenario she faced over Virginia airspace represented the kind of impossible choice that haunted military personnel who were required to make decisions affecting innocent lives under extreme time pressure. The intelligence briefing that Amanda received through encrypted radio communications revealed additional complications that made her decision even more agonizing. The terrorists aboard Flight 47 had announced their intention to crash into the Capitol building during the joint congressional session, but intelligence analysts believed they might change targets if they encountered military resistance. Alternative targets in the Washington, D.C. area included the White House, the Pentagon, and several major population centers that would result in massive civilian casualties if struck by a commercial airliner. Amanda realized that shooting down the hijacked plane might not end the threat, but could potentially redirect it toward targets where even more innocent people would be killed. Amanda's assessment of the tactical situation led her to consider an option that was not covered in any military protocol or training scenario. Instead of shooting down the passenger aircraft, she could use her F-16 as a guided missile to disable the larger plane's engines and force it to crash in an unpopulated area where civilian casualties could be minimized. The plan that Amanda developed in the span of less than 3 minutes represented extraordinary tactical thinking under impossible pressure. She would use her fighter jet to conduct a controlled collision with the hijacked airliner's engines, disabling the aircraft's ability to continue toward populated targets, while potentially allowing some passengers to survive a crash landing in rural Virginia. Amanda's decision to sacrifice her own aircraft and potentially her life to save both the passengers aboard Flight 47 and the hundreds of people in the terrorists' intended targets represented the kind of selfless heroism that defined the best traditions of military service. She understood that her actions would likely end her career and possibly her life, but she also knew that no other option existed for preventing a catastrophic terrorist attack. The collision that Amanda executed was a masterpiece of precision flying under conditions that would have been impossible for less skilled pilots. She approached Flight 407 from below and behind, using her F-16's superior maneuverability to position herself for impact with the commercial aircraft's port engine. The collision had to be precise enough to disable the airliner without causing it to break apart completely. Amanda's F-16 struck the hijacked airliner's engine with calculated force that disabled the aircraft's ability to maintain controlled flight while preserving enough structural integrity to allow for a survivable crash landing. The commercial aircraft began losing altitude immediately, forcing the hijackers to focus on attempting to maintain control rather than continuing toward their intended target. The crash landing that resulted from Amanda's intervention occurred in a sparsely populated area of rural Virginia, approximately 40 miles southwest of Washington, D.C. The commercial airliner struck the ground at a survivable angle and speed, though the impact was still devastating for those aboard. Of the 18 passengers and crew members, 23 survived the crash with various injuries, while 63 were killed on impact. Amanda's F-16 was completely destroyed in the collision, and she was severely injured during the ejection sequence that occurred milliseconds before impact. She survived the crash, but sustained injuries that ended her flying career permanently. Her actions had prevented a terrorist attack that would have killed hundreds of government officials and potentially thousands of civilians in Washington, D.C. The investigation that followed Amanda's intervention was conducted under the highest levels of classification, with participation limited to senior intelligence officials and military commanders who had clearance for operations involving domestic terrorist threats. The findings of this investigation were never released to the public, and most details remain classified today. Official reports describing the incident portrayed Amanda's actions as pilot error that resulted in a mid-air collision with a commercial aircraft experiencing mechanical difficulties. The report stated that Amanda had failed to maintain proper separation from the civilian flight and had caused a crash that killed 133 innocent people through poor judgment and violation of flight safety protocols. Amanda's court-martial was conducted behind closed doors, with testimony and evidence that could not be disclosed publicly due to national security concerns. The military prosecutors argued that Amanda had acted outside of proper authority and had caused unnecessary civilian casualties through reckless behavior that violated fundamental principles of military discipline. Amanda's defense team was severely limited in their ability to present evidence that would have demonstrated her heroic actions and justified her decisions. Classification restrictions prevented them from revealing the intelligence about the hijacking, the terrorist threat to the Capitol building, or the impossible tactical situation that Amanda had faced during the incident. The court-martial resulted in Amanda's conviction on charges of reckless endangerment, violation of flight safety protocols, and destruction of military property. She was sentenced to dismissal from the Air Force, forfeiture of all pay and benefits, and permanent prohibition from any form of military service. The sentence effectively ended her career and destroyed her reputation within the military community. Amanda's family was devastated by the court-martial results and struggled to understand how their daughter could have made such catastrophic errors in judgment. General Foster found himself defending his family's military reputation against questions about Amanda's competence and character. Commander Jake Foster experienced professional consequences as superior officers questioned whether the Foster family's military judgment could be trusted. The psychological impact on Amanda was severe and lasting. She knew that her actions had prevented a terrorist attack and saved hundreds of lives, but she was legally prohibited from discussing the classified aspects of the incident. She had to accept public disgrace and family disappointment while knowing that she had acted heroically in an impossible situation. Amanda's injuries from the ejection and crash required extensive medical treatment and rehabilitation. The military medical system provided the necessary care, but Amanda was treated as a disgraced former officer rather than an injured hero. Her medical records reflected the official version of events, describing her injuries as the result of pilot error rather than heroic action. The financial consequences of Amanda's dismissal were significant and long-lasting. She lost her military pension, health benefits, and educational support that had been earned through years of exemplary service. Finding civilian employment was difficult due to her official record of causing a civilian aircraft crash through reckless flying. For 5 years, Amanda lived with the knowledge of what she had really accomplished while being unable to share the truth with anyone, including her family. She worked various civilian jobs, struggled with post-traumatic stress related to the incident, and endured the continuing disappointment of family members who believed she had disgraced their military legacy. The declassification of documents related to Amanda's case began in 2028, when changes in government policy allowed for review of cases involving domestic counterterrorism operations. Congressional oversight committees began examining incidents where military personnel had acted to prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. The investigation that led to Amanda's exoneration was initiated by a Pentagon inspector general who was reviewing classified cases involving potential miscarriage of justice. The inspector's office had access to intelligence files and communication records that revealed the true circumstances of the Flight 40. Amanda's vindication came through a congressional hearing where classified evidence was presented to a select committee with appropriate security clearances. The testimony revealed that Amanda had prevented one of the most significant terrorist attacks in American history and had saved hundreds of lives through her heroic actions. The official reversal of Amanda's court-martial conviction included restoration of her military rank, full back pay for the 5 years she had been wrongfully dismissed, and restoration of all military benefits. She also received the Medal of Honor, making her one of the few recipients to receive the nation's highest military decoration for actions that had previously been classified. Amanda's family's reaction to learning the truth about her actions was complex and emotional. General Foster and Commander Jake Foster had to confront the reality that they had doubted their daughter and sister when she had actually performed the most heroic act in their family's military history. The revelation strengthened their family bonds but also created lasting guilt about their previous reactions. The public revelation of Amanda's story, though heavily redacted to protect ongoing intelligence operations, created national recognition of her heroism and sacrifice. She became a symbol of the difficult decisions faced by military personnel who must act to protect civilian lives even when those actions cannot be publicly acknowledged or understood. Amanda's restoration to active duty was offered by the Air Force, though her injuries prevented her from returning to flight status. She accepted a position in military intelligence, where her experience with classified operations and understanding of the personal costs of heroic action made her valuable for supporting other personnel facing similar situations. The Medal of Honor ceremony recognizing Amanda's heroism was attended by the families of passengers who had survived Flight 47's crash landing. These survivors learned for the first time that Amanda's actions had prevented their aircraft from being used as a weapon against the Capitol building and had likely saved their lives by forcing the crash to occur in a rural area. Amanda's story became a case study in military ethics courses, illustrating the complex moral decisions faced by personnel who must act quickly to protect innocent lives. Her willingness to sacrifice her career and reputation for the greater good represented the highest ideals of military service. The psychological support that Amanda received during her rehabilitation included counseling specifically designed for military personnel who had performed heroic actions under classified circumstances. The unique stresses of being unable to discuss or receive recognition for extraordinary service required specialized therapeutic approaches. Amanda's influence on military policy extended beyond her individual case to affect procedures for handling domestic terrorist threats and supporting personnel who must make difficult decisions without clear guidance from established protocols. Her experience informed training programs designed to prepare pilots for scenarios involving hijacked civilian aircraft. The Foster family's military legacy was ultimately enhanced rather than damaged by Amanda's actions, though it took years for this to become apparent. Her willingness to sacrifice everything for the protection of innocent lives represented the highest expression of the values that had defined their family's military service across generations. Amanda's story illustrates the hidden costs of military service and the reality that some of the most heroic actions performed by military personnel may never be publicly acknowledged or understood. Her willingness to accept a disgrace and family disappointment while knowing she had acted heroically demonstrates the kind of personal sacrifice that protects civilian populations from threats they may never know existed. The commercial aviation industry implemented new security procedures as a result of the Flight 4047 incident, though these changes were introduced without public explanation of the terrorist threat that Amanda had prevented. Her actions influenced policies that continue to protect civilian aircraft from hijacking attempts. Amanda's continued service in military intelligence allowed her to support other personnel facing situations where classified information prevented them from receiving proper recognition or support for their actions. Her experience provided valuable insights for addressing the psychological and professional challenges faced by personnel in sensitive positions. The Medal of Honor that Amanda eventually received represented not only recognition of her individual heroism, but also acknowledgement of the sacrifices made by all military personnel who performed classified missions that cannot be publicly discussed or celebrated. Her story became a reminder that heroism often occurs in circumstances where it cannot be immediately recognized or rewarded. Amanda Foster proved that true military heroism sometimes requires the courage to accept blame and disgrace, while knowing that history will eventually reveal the truth. Her willingness to sacrifice her career, reputation, and family relationships for the protection of innocent lives represents the highest ideals of military service and personal integrity. The pilot who was once considered the family disgrace became the greatest hero the Foster family had ever produced, demonstrating that real courage is often hidden from public view and that the most important victories are sometimes the ones that cannot be celebrated until years after they occur. Some crashes prevent greater disasters, and some career endings are actually the beginning of even more important service. Amanda Foster learned that the greatest honor comes not from public recognition but from the knowledge that, when the moment came to choose between personal success and protecting innocent lives, she made the right choice regardless of the personal cost.